Hey, this is Manav Misra, aka Codefinity, and in this video I'm going to use Faker to generate an array of 1,000 users with these properties. It doesn't really matter what properties, these are the ones I picked, and they're going to have this data all filled in randomly with Faker. Not only that, we're going to work with promises and the nodes FS or file system package, and we're going to create this, we're going to write this data into a JSON file, users.json. So let's get started with that right now. So speaking of getting started, let's click that button. We need to install this Faker package. So we're going to do that right now, pop that in. This is going to be added to our package JSON file as a developer dependency. You could make it a dependency, but it's really more of a developer thing, something we'll just do one time and then just reuse it. But either way is fine. Let's jump into VS Code here. And I am using, so this code is actually irrelevant. Let's clear that out. I'm using my node starter template repo. So this comes pre-configured with some ESLint, Prettier, some sensible settings that take care of a lot of headache things like auto-saving, auto-formatting, auto-fixing, and a bunch of other stuff. If you have any questions about that, hit me up in the comments. Happy to walk you through. The link for this, in case you want to use it, is in the show notes here. Otherwise, do this however you want to. I will be using modern ESM or ECMAScript modules, so at the very least, you want to make sure that you have type module enabled. The rest of this is just pretty much extra stuff. Of course, we have Faker in here. So let's get started with the actual project here. We're going to go to usage, and I'm going to import Faker, the thing that we just installed. Pop that at the top here. I'm working here in my app index. We're not going to do any testing on this particular small one-off app, so I'm going to delete that test file. So we import Faker, and now I'm going to create a function that's going to be called createFakeUser. And for that, I will use arrow syntax. And in case you're wondering, I'm getting these warnings here, just little warnings from my linter settings. I'm using an extension called error lens to really call those out in case I want to deal with them, but I'm not worried about them in this particular scenario. So here's my arrow function. It's empty. I'm going to want to return something. And then again, these are just more linting things, not worried about them right now. I'm going to want to return an object. And looking back at the demo file that I showed earlier, we're going to want ID, avatar, full name, phrase, and username. So let's pop that in here. I'm going to want an ID. And for that, using Faker, Copilot is auto-completing this for me, but let me show you how we would do this in case we weren't aware of Faker too much. So if I go here into usage and I just do a search for UUID, the documentation is really great, and it shows me right here, I can do Faker data type UUID, okay? So that's where that's coming from. So again, you can look all of these things up in Faker. I won't bore you with looking at documentation. Literally just go here and search what you're looking for generally. If you have further questions, just hit me up in the comments and I'll keep an eye out for those. So let's finish this up because we're just about done. We need an ID. I want to have an avatar. So actually that's not a correct suggestion from Copilot. This is going to be internet.avatar. Let me confirm that because one of the ways is actually deprecated and I don't want to use that one. So if I look under avatar, great, this is not the deprecated one. Some of the stuff when you go here, it tells you, so there was one of them earlier, it tells you, hey, this is deprecated. So if you see this, maybe avoid using it. But the avatar one that I just looked up should be good to go, faker.internet.avatar. So again, this is all coming from Faker that we installed. So we want an avatar. Let's do a phrase, and that's going to be faker.hacker, and I think it's faker.hacker.phrase. I guess I am boring you showing you the documentation because I already forgot how this works. So let's go into hacker, and if we look at phrase, yeah, that looks right. It just creates some sort of a phrase on here. So again, there's a lot of stuff you can use. I'm just using these things because I need them for a particular reason for something else. Definitely need a full name and then a username. So let's knock those out now. Kind of keep these roughly alphabetical. Full name. There we go. Faker.name.fullname. And then finally, we need a username. So that should be faker.internet.username. Let's just try this out really quickly with one user. And at this time, because of those settings that I have in here, I'm going to hit Command S, and it's going to basically resolve all of these sort of suggestions from the ESLint. And it's going to just consolidate this down. And since I'm using just a single statement with a return, it's going to say, hey, you can just put this together in one situation like this and just wrap some parentheses and do an implicit return of an object. Again, you can write it however you want to. But if you are using this Node template starter, it'll help you out with some of those cleanups. Okay, and now let's just try this out really quickly. Let's do a console.log, create fake user, and we'll run this. I'm going to say node app index.js, and it looks like this is not actually working in here, random.uuid. That is actually not correct, is it? I should have looked all of these up instead of listening to Copilot too much. Let's go in here and look this up here, UUID, and that's data type. In fact, I know I said that earlier, and I was listening to silly Copilot. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not so great. Try that again. Perfect. So this is what we end up with, and now we just need to create 1,000 of these. So the next part of this is to create an empty array. So let's do something like this, const users equals array.from. So this is a capital A array. You can look this up on MDN, but this is the array class or function constructor, and we can use this static method from, which will essentially create an array on the fly for us. There's a few ways you could do this, but I'm just going to pop in here length 1000. Again, this is covered in the MDN documentation. I'll try to drop a link to that in the notes also, but you can create an array like this. In fact, before we go any further, let me just show you what that looks like right now. So it just creates literally an array full of undefined things. What I can do with that array, though, since it's now an array, I can map over it, and that will go over each element, and it will run this function on each element, and that's going to create the user. So check this out here. We'll say users, and there we go. We have 1,000 users generated. Once again, the way that this worked is we created an array just full of undefined stuff. And again, there's a couple ways you could do this. It's just what I did here. But the point is, once you have an array of 1,000 elements, if you will, we can map over those and run our callback function. So this goes over it one at a time and just keeps spitting out an object, and this is going to happen 1,000 times inside of this map. Last but not least, we're going to work with promises and the FS. So with Node, we have the FS module, which is for reading and writing files, among other things. And I'm going to import specifically the promises part of FS. So what I'm doing here is I am saying I want to work with the FS module. I only want the promises part of the FS module, and in here, since I'm importing that for convenience, I'm going to rename this as FS. So I could have done something like this and like said, oh, I want to call it Mickey, and then, or whatever I wanted, made up name in that part, okay? So promises is not a made up name. That is the asynchronous part of the FS module, which comes with Node. As a convenience, though, I'm choosing to take that and rename that as FS. So I can write my code just with fs.read file, write file, etc. And speaking of which, let's finish this up by saying fs.write file. And yeah, we'll call the file users.json. We're going to use json.stringify. So what that does is, as the name implies, it takes a JavaScript objects and it stringifies them, right? So we're going to say, I want to write file, I want to users.json, I want to stringify this users that we just saw. So this is an array of JavaScript objects, and we're going to stringify it into actual JSON. And I'm just going to show you, oh, and then as part of this, we need to specify, I don't know if we need to, but we should specify that we're using UTF-8, which is just kind of universally how we want our human readable data to be generated, the character encoding scheme. But Let's go ahead and now let's just run this, and we should be able to see our file now. So there's that, and it did indeed create a user's JSON file, but it's really jumbled and hard to read. So as one last step, JSON Stringify has a couple of additional options, and the second one is not really that useful, but the third, I should say, it has optional parameters, and in the third parameter spot, we can pass in an argument that's an integer, and that's going to do a little formatting for us. So one more time when we do this, and look at the file now, it's nicely formatted with 2 spaces indentation. And that's it. So in this video, we installed the Faker package. We also worked with FS, which is part of Node, and we specifically worked with promises here. Although we really didn't do any async or await or anything, because there was really nothing to await. Just run the code and open the file manually. So I didn't really do much with promises. But if you didn't know, now you know that there is a promises portion of the FS module, and you can import that specifically, and you can rename that to whatever name you want. So then we wrote this function. We saw the arrow syntax. We saw an implicit return of an object here, and then we created an array with 1,000 empty elements, and then we used map to create a whole new array from this original array. And all it did was go over all those undefined spots and replace, not necessarily replace, but map over and return out a fake user. Because map doesn't replace anything, it creates a whole new array. So at any rate, we used map on this array of undefines to create our user's array. And then we decided to write that to this file name. And we wanted to stringify our JavaScript array of objects into actual JSON. And we did a little bit of formatting by using this third optional parameter. We passed in number 2 here as the argument, and we specified UTF-8, which I don't know that you would ever want to do anything different there. So that's it. Hopefully you picked up a couple of things, and that's all I got.